Hiya! Thanks for being here today. Today I'm going to talk about, on Serious Sunday, this subject of Loose Women, which is a TV show in the UK, and it's 4 women panellists who have guests on and they talk about the issues of the day. It's a sort of Monday to Friday type show, daytime type thing, around about lunchtime, kind of thing that a student or a retired person or a full-time mum might sit and watch, full-time parent, let's say, might sit and watch at home. And it's very much geared as a sort of woman's perspective on things. Now, they did a show on Friday which was touched on a specific issue of something that happened. So I'll give you the context. Firstly, I watched it. I went back and I watched it. I found it online on streaming and I watched the segment, so I've seen it. I know what I'm talking about. The section they were talking about was about a case of wards in hospitals where you have all male wards, all female wards, but we still have mixed gender wards. We still have wards that are male and female, and men and women have to stay together. Apparently the government in the UK has made some kind of commitment to get rid of these multi-gender wards and to only have male wards or female wards. But, as always, this now brings up the issue of trans people. Where do trans people go? Do they go into the male ward or the female ward? Do you go in based on your genitals? Do you go in based on what your brain is? Do you go in based on your self-identification? Do you go in based on your GIC certificate? You know, that whole can of worms then gets opened up again because we've got rid of multi-gender wards. But even so, there are certain hospitals that have all male wards and all female wards. And generally speaking, for the most part in the NHS, they've got quite an inclusive policy that if someone is gender dysphoric and they are transgendered in that way, and that they absolutely identify as a specific gender that is not their birth gender, then that's generally taken into account and they will be placed in a ward that is suitable based on their gender identity. And, you know, fantastic thing, that's great. The background to this story is that apparently a pre-op transgendered woman in an all-female ward, or in a ward with other women there as well, became aroused. And that was uncomfortable for certain people. And that was the talking point. Now, rather than having a philosophical debate about the whole subject, etc., most of this came down, as it always does, instantly, to genitals. So on the panel we had 4 women. I would say, roughly speaking, we had 2 people who were sort of against the idea of trans people in female wards. One person who was very much pro and was sort of thoughtful and accommodating. And then we had Nadia Sawala, who sat on the fence so much she must have a painful bum at the end of it because she was on the fence for that much of the conversation. And the whole conversation probably lasted 6 minutes. Not much more than that. It was a really short conversation. I'm going to talk about it for longer than they did on the show. With that in mind, we had a sort of older panellist group who had more conservative views, and Stacey Solomon, as a younger panellist person who I guess is in her early 30s, who was presenting a much more tolerant and open view on the placement of trans people within these wards. Now, the argument from Gloria Hunniford, who's Gloria's got to be what, in her late 60s, 70s, etc. Her view was that if she were in an all-female ward and she was walking around with a gown open at the back, you have the kind of hospital gowns, they tie up at the back, they're a little bit exposed, she wouldn't want to be in a ward with a man. Whether that was a shared, multi-gender ward, or whether that was a ward with a trans man, or trans woman rather. Actually, that was the interesting thing. No mention of being uncomfortable with a former woman who has now got a surgically created penis. This is what they don't touch on, because we don't touch on that. We only look at the specific little slither that happens to upset us. So what was upsetting today? A pre-op transgender woman who they were labelling as a man. They made certain points, specifically they were going to lengths of even correcting other panellists to say, no, it's a man. A man. Constantly highlighting that fact. Completely ignoring the fact that in their brain, as Stacey Solomon was pointing out, that in their brain they are female. They've been trapped in a male body. If you've got dysphoria, I feel sorry for you. I'd hate to have that myself. But they are people who are faced with this dilemma of, do I go through this incredibly difficult and painful surgery in order to correct every aspect of my body that I'm not happy with? Or, am I comfortable with retaining certain aspects of my male body as long as I can achieve the general overall look and feel that I want to? These are questions that are deeply personal. And the idea that what we should do is we should take someone and say, hi, you look female. In your brain, you seem female. What's going on down there? What's going on in the trousers, under the skirt, inside the knickers? Because if it's male, then you can't come in this ward. You belong somewhere else. If it's female, I guess we can have you in here. Because that seems to be the crux of the conversation. Everything revolves around genitalia. It's such a weird thing. We've got such a sort of a massive complex about genitalia and our private parts and how they can't be shared, etc. It's a real complex we have, and it seems to be the crux of all of these arguments. Every anti-argument always comes down to genitalia. When it came down to it, they had very little to say on the subject of, what about this? What about a trans man who has not had surgery? I assume, therefore, they belong on a ward with you as a woman because they haven't had surgery and therefore they shouldn't be in with the guys. Or maybe the guys aren't so sensitive, so they put up with it. I don't know. But in that case, by implication, those women talking on the panel who were against this idea should be comfortable with a muscly, bearded person sat opposite them in a bed, looking at them, watching them. As long as they know that person doesn't have a penis, then that's fine. That person has a male brain, beard, muscles, no boobs, okay? Look like a guy. They're happy to sit opposite a guy as long as that person doesn't have a penis. The minute they have the surgery and they've now got, a surgically constructed penis, then they're out of there and they're into the male ward. But they mustn't be in there until that's done. That's the reverse of the argument. And the reverse of the argument is so ludicrous. It's so utterly ludicrous that they never ever bring it up. Because the only people we seem to be fussy about is pre-op transgender women. They're the problem ones, apparently. Me as well, in the sense that, I have female aspects to my brain, but I'm not dysphoric, and clearly I still have all my male bits, but I go out looking like a woman. I kind of get lumped into that area as well. If it were me in that situation, if I were going into hospital, because I have the option of being male orientated or female orientated in terms of identity or in terms of expression, because I have that option and I don't feel like I'm one or the other trapped in my body, I can be flexible. I can go to hospital and just be a guy. It's fine. I'll just be a guy for a couple of days. Why do I want the hassle of going through all of this in order to be in hospital? It doesn't make sense. So I'll be a guy for a couple of days. And so people like me can deal with that. But people who are dysphoric, they can't. They can't make that choice. They can't say, oh, I'll be the guy for the day. Because inside you're not. Being on an all-male ward as a trans woman with clear differences in perhaps you've been taking hormones, you've maybe got a softer face shape, you've maybe had laser, you've got no beard growth, you may be wearing makeup on a daily basis, you might be living as a woman. And the idea that someone comes along and says, no, male junk, male genitalia, you're in there with the guys because the women don't want you. Or, and this is always the most stupid thing about this, or we have to have trans wards. Now, one of the suggestions that they made on the show was that, there's always rooms in hospitals, there's always rooms, so we'll put the trans person in a room. And this always happens. So let's give you a few examples of other ways in which it's happened with other demographics, other minorities. Okay, trans people are a minority. The argument they were coming up with was, You shouldn't make the majority uncomfortable in order to satisfy the needs of a minority. Now, firstly, there's an assumption made there. You're making an assumption that everyone else thinks the same way you do. Just because you're in this massive cisgender community doesn't mean that every woman in the entire world would be uncomfortable having a pre-op transgender woman, someone who is clearly identified as a woman, in their hospital ward with you. You've kind of made the assumption that because you're all cis, you'll all think the same and everyone will be upset by this. That isn't true. That certainly will not be statistically true. It might be the majority. It might be 5 out of 9 women would be upset about it. But some of that comes down to education. It comes down to expectations. For the most part, you're in there to get well. You're not really in there to feel comfortable. Most of us don't feel comfortable, but I understand how you'd want to feel more comfortable. Let me give you some examples of when this has been used in the past as an excuse. We've used this on the grounds of religion. It's been used on the grounds of race. It's been used on the grounds of sex. So as an example, the idea of having a black person on your ward, there are plenty of places in the world where the idea of having a black person on a ward with white people would make the white people uncomfortable. Well, today, our view on that is tough luck, get comfortable. Imagine it's a religious basis. When you take a religion that wants to absolutely exclude all other religions and wants to isolate itself, there are various different religions around the world that want to isolate themselves. We tend to view them as sects or cults. We view them differently to religions because they're isolationist. If you cannot be with other people, if you cannot be with people of other religions, then you are creating religious divisiveness and you are trying to exclude people. And generally speaking, the majority of religious thought these days is around having tolerance for people of other faiths and for accepting other people. People of minority faiths, for example. There's religion's a complicated one. I really don't want to get into that. But it's another example of how, for the most part, in many Western countries, we try to practice some level of tolerance towards people of other faiths. Now, gender. The idea of all-male social clubs is antiquated, it's outdated. The idea that women can't do certain jobs, women can't do things. You can't be part of my club, you can't be part of my group, you can't play my sport, you can't join my club, you can't like the same things I do, you can't come, watch some of the games that I watch, you can't take part in this, you can't study this in this school, and you certainly can't practice this as a career, as a profession. These are all antiquated, outdated things where we've stopped excluding a minority, even if we create the minority. Okay? Women are more than 50% of the population of the planet, but you create minorities. You create minorities by saying the number of capable women to be doctors is so small that it would be upsetting to all the capable male doctors to have to put up with women. That would be too difficult. Because you isolate people. You make people into smaller and smaller communities. So instead of saying the world is 50% male, 50% female, so surely half of all doctors should be women, what we say is women aren't capable, they're lower, they're lesser. So you degrade their role, push them down and say, therefore, it would be too disruptive for us to lift them up to where we are, where they need to be. The same is exactly the truth these days of trans people. The idea that it would be uncomfortable for the majority in order to put up with a trans person being in a ward, my view on that is that's tough luck. Yeah, it might be uncomfortable for you. Get comfortable. What's the problem? It's another human being. It's a person. It's someone with thoughts and feelings and family, and they've got people around them and they want to be understood. They want to be respected. They want to be tolerated. What's wrong with any of that? Ultimately, this argument was caused by someone having a state of arousal in a hospital bed in view of women. Now, this is the bottom line on this for me. If you took that person, lifted them up, and put them next to me in an all-male ward, I would be uncomfortable. Because I would be uncomfortable with the person next to me being aroused. Now, I don't know exactly what they're doing. If they are stimulating themselves to arousal, then that would certainly make me uncomfortable. If they just happen to be, that way, I think I'll be like, oh, I don't want to see that. You know, come on, I don't draw the curtain. I don't want to see that. But it doesn't necessarily intrude upon me. You turn over, you look the other way. You know, you stare off in the distance. These things happen. I don't want to be sat next to someone on a train who's aroused. It doesn't matter. You can't have all female train carriages and all male train carriages because sometimes men get aroused. It just happens. So this idea that it should be, that this is some kind of a trump card, it's some kind of a great example of how multi-gender wards or inclusion of trans people in wards doesn't work or won't work, it's ludicrous. And it doesn't work when you reverse it. It does not work when you flip it around the other way. Okay? Because for men, if you told me there was a trans man who still had a vagina in my hospital ward with me as a guy, I'm fine with that. If they then get aroused in a way that let's face it, with women is somewhat less physically obvious, but let's say they get aroused and it's noticeable to me, that's going to make me uncomfortable. Of course it is. What genitals they have makes no difference to me. It's the act. It's not the thing. The act is important, not the thing. Anyway, that was my view on that one. It's a complicated subject, but I was at least pleased to see that they had at least one panel on there who was progressive, did put up a good argument, was very much outnumbered and corrected, or let's say attempted corrections that were, again, quite limited, I guess, in terms of their viewpoint. But congratulations to Stacey Solomon. I thought she put a really good argument forward. I thought she did her best, and I was grateful for that. It was nice to see, at least to see that opposing viewpoint presented on the show. At least it wasn't just uninterrupted, you know, Daily Mail bile. It wasn't that. It was at least some level of balance on there. I wish there'd been a bit more balance, but congratulations for Stacey for at least standing up for the community. Thanks so much for that. Anyway, have you heard about this? Did you read about it? Did you see it? If you want to, you can go find it on the itb.com player thing, app, streaming, whatever, jobby. I don't know if you can see it outside the UK, but it's available in the UK for sure, and I think it will be available to the end of this week. So as long as you catch it before Friday, I think you'll be able to see that if you're interested. It's worthwhile just at least seeing the context so you understand what they were saying. It's an interesting conversation. I think it's disappointing to see this on British television. It's disappointing to see it going out during the daytime, and I guess presenting this normalised view of division and of a problem. And I think that's a real shame. Anyway, if you have seen it, let me know in the comment section down below what you think. Very interested to hear people's viewpoints on this one. It's an interesting conversation subject. Feel free to like, share and subscribe. Click the little bell to stay notified about upcoming videos. And I look forward to talking to you again on the next Hero Sunday. As ever, bye! Bye!